Parents of Reddit, what's the funniest reason you've been called into school to collect your child? When I was in 7th grade, I was an office runner. Basically, if your reading and writing skills were above a certain level, they'd let you skip reading class and just work in the office, getting kids whose parents had come for them, delivering messages, that sort of thing. Point anyway, the kid next to me just wouldn't shut the fuck up. He kept rattling on and on and on, and I'd had enough of it. I had a monster fudged brewing, so I cocked my leg, locked eyes with him, told him to shut his mouth, and fudged it on him. Or, at least, that was the plan. Instead, I cocked my leg, locked eyes with him, told him to shut his mouth, and completely sheet my pants in the most glorious fashion. This wasn't a little nugget. This was a full pants load of chocolate pudding that ran down my leg and made a little puddle on the floor. Everything in the office goes dead silent, and there's no mistaking what's just happened. The kid just stared at me with absolute horror in his eyes without looking away from him. I raised my hand and said, "Miss, office lady's name, I don't remember. I think I need to call my mom." I went home, took a bath, threw the pants away, and came back the next day. The kid was seated on the opposite side of the room from me, and I never had a problem with him again. He feared and respected me from then on. Oh my god, I totally forgot my son mooned a few kids back when he was in 1st grade. He apparently was digging a hole by bending over and scooping sand backwards between his legs, like how a dog digs. He's a scrawny lanky kid, so pants that are long enough are always a bit loose around the waist. Well, his drawers must have slipped a bit, and one of the girls shouted, "Pull up your pants," and he decided to pull down his underwear and shake his bottom at them. They laughed. The teacher on recess duty was crying laughing, but figured she needed to pull the maturity card and had my son go back inside to the classroom before recess was over, so his classroom teacher could explain why we don't show our bottoms in public. My son was in tears. The classroom teacher also was trying not to laugh, and I got the obligatory email saying your child mooned the playground. We discussed why this was a poor choice of actions, and your child expressed remorse and apologized to his classmates. We felt no further disciplinary action was needed at school. We had parent-teacher conferences the next day. Both teachers apologized for laughing, but couldn't help it. Because of all the kids at school, he was not the one they would have pegged as the playground mooner. When I was in middle school, some poor guy got pantsed right in front of me, a girl who shared many of his classes. Normally, it had been no big deal. Someone got pantsed in my school on at least a weekly basis. No, the really awkward part was I was kinda crouched down because I had a bottom locker and he was standing up with the top locker next to mine, not above but I guess on a diagonal. His pantser shouted right as he pulled, so of course I looked up at the shout because it startled me. And well, the pantsed individual's boxers had been pulled down along with his pants, so right in front of my eyes was a penis. It was the first penis I'd ever seen in person, well outside of seeing like baby cousins get changed and stuff, and considering we were 11, I was presumably the first girl, outside of his close family, when he was little, to see his penis. It was just for a split second, because obviously the guy pulled his pants back up with lightning reflexes. I have never seen someone go so red in the face. We both stood there in shock for a couple of seconds as the hallway cleared and began walking to class. We shared the next class. The whole time he was stammering out apologies, and I kept telling him it wasn't his fault. It's not like he'd pulled his own pants down. After class, other students asked me if I'd seen it, and I lied profusely. "What are you talking about? He was wearing underwear. How would I see anything?" "Oh well, in the back they came down. The whole hallway could see his ass." "Oh my god." "Well, they didn't come down in the front." The rest of the year this guy, who was a practical stranger, was pretty nice to me. Not like flirty nice, but I think he figured out that I lied, so he felt he owed me 1 point at it. Woo, my first gold. Thanks. Honestly, I was super embarrassed, but I couldn't even imagine how embarrassed he was. He looked like he wanted to crawl in a hole and die. I had been being bullied a good deal, knew how shitty it felt, and didn't want to subject someone else to that, because you know in middle school the story would have been twisted to make him a creep, weirdo, or even I heard she said it was super small / weird looking. It's funny now, but wasn't at the time. One day I was called to pick up my daughter from school. I asked why and was vaguely told she had been caught cheating, was being disrespectful to the teacher, and had destroyed government property. Holy shit, I thought. What had she done? My mind instantly went through scenarios in which she had cheated on a test, got caught, then my sweet little 7-year-old had cursed the teacher while throwing something through a window. I got to the school, found my scared daughter in the principal's office looking totally dejected and asked for an explanation. I discovered the cheating was that she had giggled while playing a game where someone was it, and the other half of the classroom had to guess who it was. The disrespecting teacher was from her crossing her arms when she was being told how she wrecked the game. The best was the explanation for destroying government property. During story time she was picking at loose carpet threads. I was extremely angry with my daughter the whole drive from work, and after this load of WTF it instantly transferred to anger with the school. You called me here because she giggled, crossed her arms, and picked at old nasty carpet? I was hot and took my daughter home, letting her know I was a bit upset with her, but let her know that there would be no more punishment. She'd been through enough. We went home and watched cartoons, and I made her favorite grilled cheese and tomato soup for lunch. In 2nd grade there were a couple of boys that were running up to girls at recess and pulling their pants down and then making a scene so everyone would look. This went on for days, and when they tried to do it to me, I chased them down and pulled their pants down in front of everyone and yelled and laughed, just like they had been doing. I got sent to the principal's office and my mom had to come and get me. The principal told her he was going to call CPS because if I was going around pulling little boys' pants down, there was obviously some kind of sexual abuse going on at our house. There wasn't. I just wanted those fakers to see what it felt like so they'd stop doing it. Also, in kindergarten, my mom got called to the school because I called the teacher dumb. She was spelling my name wrong. I argued with her. She took me to the principal and said I might be special needs because I couldn't spell my name. Turns out when my dad registered me, he spelled my name the way he had wanted it spelled, not the way it was actually spelled. He was never allowed to register me for anything ever again, and to this day he spells my name wrong on cards and presents as a joke. One thing you should know about me right off the bat is that I don't really get sarcasm. I don't know why, but for some reason it just goes over my head, and I legitimately can't tell sarcasm from everything else. Never have and probably never will, so if you say something to me, you better mean it. This was at a daycare. There was this one boy who kept literally pulling my pigtails, stealing my toys, and just being an overall ass. I told the nuns, but they said to just pray for strength and forgiveness. I told my mom, and she said to not rock the boat and try to ignore him, which seemed unfair at the time, but looking back at it, I understand why she said that. It was a free daycare, and we were dirt floor poor, so it really did help my mom out a lot. Later at a family dinner I complained to my auntie. Now my auntie is a no nonsense butch kick him in the pants type of lady. So she told me, well, kick his ass and make him leave you alone. Apparently that was sarcasm. Guess who couldn't tell it was sarcasm? If you guessed me then you'd be right. The next time Jeremy pulled my pigtails I wiped around and beat his face as much as any 7-year-old could. Yeah. Mom was pissed. Auntie thought it was hilarious, and I had to take extra classes on forgiveness and patience. When my darling child was in 1st grade, I got a call from the school to let us know that the quiet shy kid was put on red and had to serve lunch detention. Cue up a sense of panic as usually it was her twin in trouble. We joked that this child's native name would be Little River Run Still But Deep, referring to the idea that on the surface water can appear calm, but the undertow will kill you. She never complained, barely cried as a baby, and was generally the most easygoing person on the planet. But piss her off enough she will strike hard and fast. Like the time as toddlers her twin was pushing her and knocking her down. She calmly walked into the kitchen with me to get her sippy cup and came back in the room, whacked her sister upside the head, and proceeded to watch cartoons. Twin had a good sized egg on her head from that. What did she do that was so horrible? In class after the Zero Tolerance for Bullies program, she finally got tired of one of the boys throwing things at her and talking to her constantly. She wrote a note that said, "You will die someday." No direct threat of violence, but merely informing a first grader that he was mortal and would die at some point in the future. The teacher laughed when she told us, but said because it was right after the program she had to punish her. In 9th grade I had this awful algebra class first thing in the morning. The teacher would just collect our homework and then hand out a test every day, so I would finish my test and then put my head down for some extra sleep. She would always scold me for this and for not being prepared. After a few weeks of her scolding me and me continuing on, she eventually called my mom and, "Your son has been insubordinate. He rushes through tests and then sleeps in class. I have told him time and time again to check his work, and he still does not. He has been unprepared for my class every day." My mom was very strict, and I could tell she was mad at me, but she asked, "How has he not been prepared?" She turns to me, "Have you been neglecting your homework, teacher?" Replies, "No, he has not been bringing in his calculator. The school required us all to have a fancy T-model calculator that costs $80. So my mother had my brother and I share one." I could tell she felt a little at fault, but it was algebra. I didn't need a calculator. My mom says, "Well, how are his grades, teacher?" Pulls out a stack of graded tests. He gets every answer right, but I have to take points away for him not checking his work with a calculator. Overall he is a B+ student. My mom, "Well, it looks to me like he does not need the calculator." The teacher looked so shocked, speechless. I got excited because I knew mom was on my side for a change. "Perhaps he is sleeping through the majority of your class because he isn't engaged with how the material is being taught." Oh, snap. I think he needs to be placed in a more advanced class. I'd like to post on behalf of my father, who loves to tell this story when he wants to embarrass me. In my sophomore year of high school, I had a brand spanking new teacher. She was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, a very clean individual, and completely unprepared for my best friend and I to be in the same class. We were little sheetheads. We didn't act particularly disruptive, but our sense of humor was different than hers. The first time I butted heads with this teacher, we had a creative writing assignment to write a dramatic proposal of marriage to any person of my choice. At this same time, my best friend was working on a joke defense for the debate team. "You shouldn't masturbate solely because it causes hairy palms." I wrote a marriage proposal from him to himself, talking about how great he was because he was going to rid the world of all of these hairy palms caused by masturbation. I didn't go into detail of the act, just said the word. My easily offended English teacher wanted me to be suspended for that. Dad got a call, had to show up and answer for my alleged crimes. We meet with an assistant principal who became increasingly upset that my dad didn't see the issue. He managed to talk me out of suspension and told me that he didn't believe the mere use of the word warranted punishment, and conveyed some distaste that the English teacher made him burn personal time off at work for him to show up at the school. Fast forward a few months, and we are assigned to read Pride and Prejudice. I gave it an honest shot, I really did. I couldn't make it past chapter 6 before I couldn't stand it. I just stopped reading. One day, we show up to class and we have a quiz over the previous night's assigned reading. However, the copy machine was broken, so our teacher read the quiz aloud and had us write our answers on notebook paper. I took the time to write her a letter. In this letter, I outlined why I wouldn't read the book. I called it Victorian soap opera drivel, not worth the limited time students have available, and pulled out what was the pinnacle of comedy at that time, Chuck Norris. I wrote to my teacher that if I could, I'd hire Chuck Norris to do a roundhouse kick so fast that his foot would go back in time and break Jane Austen's wrist so that she couldn't write this crap. I closed the letter with, "To be blunt, Ms. W, whoever got this book put onto our required reading list is basically a sadist." The bell rang. I turned in my letter and headed to my next class. Roughly 2 hours later, I was called to the office. There is my dad, my English teacher, and the assistant principal, all sitting around the table with my letter square in the middle. Guess who wanted me to be suspended again? My dad was mad, but was keeping a fairly calm demeanor. There was much arguing again about whether or not to suspend me, with the English teacher actually yelling about it. Turns out she was the one that had the book added to the reading list, thus she was taking it kind of personally. My dad refused to allow me to be suspended simply for the letter. He made a good point. Suspend him for not doing his work, but you can't kick him out of class because you don't like his opinions. Finally the assistant principal got the English teacher to agree to that, and I was sent home for out of school suspension. My dad took me home. In reality, we went out for ice cream. He told me that he'd been in the office for a bit before I was called in and asked if he knew how hard it was to keep a straight face as the tiny little English teacher read my letter. Growing increasingly red in the face with every line. He loved it. Turns out we share a mutual distaste for Victorian soap operas. Now he loves to tell that story whenever he talks about schools punishing kids for stupid things. I think it's his favorite story, mostly because he got to defend me instead of hearing about stupid shit I did that definitely deserved punishment. My stepson got sent home in epic style. This was when he was in high school. Their gym class was split up each semester by pay and swimming. The problem was for some reason one day during swimming, they were told not to use the pool. Rather than just having them do pay, they sat in the pool area doing nothing. They were permitted to get up and walk around though. On one of his passes around the pool he decided he wanted to stand on the diving board. When the teacher yelled at him to get down he said the following: "You don't own me. You can't control me." He then proceeded to yell at the top of his lungs "Free bird," and jumped into the pool fully clothed. The principal was laughing when we walked in, and he told us the only reason my son was getting sent home was so the teacher could save face. Another story that didn't involve school, but instead the police. My wife and I were out shopping when she received a call from the local police in our neighborhood. He and his friends, his brother included, were caught trespassing. Apparently what happened was he and his friends went down to this lot where the local mine company stored their heavy equipment, that is dump trucks, bulldozers, and bucket loaders. They decided they were going to dig trenches, build forts with trees they knocked down, as well as have races with the equipment. The cops showed up and everyone took off running. He saw that it was a K9 unit that showed up and decided he was not going to run, so he was the only one who got rolled up. When we showed up at the police station he was sitting in the dispatch room with all of the officers laughing, like he was just stopping by for a visit. The police said because he didn't run they weren't going to pursue any charges unless the mine company reported that they had damaged any of the equipment. Nothing ever came of it. My second grader snuck a shoebox of baby birds into school. Here are the series of events that led to the discovery of the baby birds. My second grader was staying with grandparents while husband and I were out of town. There was a nest of baby birds on her grandparents' front porch. Before leaving for school, my second grader asked her grandpa for a shoebox claiming that she wanted to bring some leaves she found into her class for show tell. Her grandpa asked why she couldn't just use a plastic bag for the leaves, but she was adamant about the shoebox. While her grandparents weren't paying attention, she apparently scooped up the baby birds out of the nest and placed them in a shoebox full of leaves. The baby birds were apparently very quiet during the drive to school because grandpa didn't notice or hear anything unusual. Sometime during class, my second grader's teacher heard chirping coming from my kid's desk. That baby birds were discovered. I get a call from school about the discovery of the baby birds. The teachers aren't angry, they actually find it adorable and hilarious at the same time that this little kid managed to sneak baby birds into school without an adult finding out. The school offers to release the baby birds at a nearby park, but I figured that would be a death sentence for the baby birds to be released without their mama bird. Since I'm out of town, I arrange for a grandparent to pick up the baby birds to be put back in their original nest. Baby birds are returned to their nest unharmed, and my second grader doesn't get in trouble because we didn't know how to disciple something so adorable / hilarious. Not the parent but the child, posting on my mother's behalf as she doesn't read it, but still wanted me to write this. I was in 6th grade. She got a call from our dean informing her that she had to come pick me up from school because I was suspended for telling my evil math teacher that there was no reward for being the fattest person on earth. She wasn't even upset because she knew that teacher had been giving me and my twin sister hell for months and she couldn't stand her. In fact, when the dean called her, I could actually hear her laughing on the other end, and the dean reprimanded her for her response as well. My mom high-fived me and bought me McDonald's on the way home that day. Point for those asking, this teacher hated my sister and I. We were those kids that were super shy and quiet and never stood out in school. We did our work, made the good grades, and left. One day we were all taking a test and my sister was the first one to finish. She even did the anxiety thing, where you sit there for 10 minutes waiting to see if anyone else would turn in their test first, and then gave up and brought it to the teacher. She took one look at her and the test and said, "Jessica, there is no reward for finishing first. Go sit down and look over it again." She was pretty damn crushed because 1. She was 12 too. Of course everyone was staring and laughing at her as she walked back to her desk. Anyway, literally as soon as she sat down another girl got up and turned in her test and the teacher said, "AWW, great job Alexis. The first one done, you should be so proud. I shit you not." So that's when I wrote on my test, "There's no reward for being the fattest person on earth either, so." And then my dumbass turned the test in without erasing it. The only reason I got in trouble is because the teacher couldn't even remember that she had crushed my sister like that. She thought she had crushed me. So she thought I wrote that in response to her saying that to me as whole. I wouldn't say I grew up poor, but my school had a strict uniform code and we couldn't always afford to buy new clothes and we were forced to wear old or worn out clothes as a result. The dress code was navy blue pants and either a white or light blue polo. There were a ton of other rules/stipulations, but those aren't relevant. I had maybe 2 pairs of uniform pants at the time, and only 1 pair fit me, so I pretty much wore them every single day. As a consequence, they grew faded and weren't the dark color the uniform required anymore. My English teacher was a massive beach and always had something to say to me about my pants. Being 13 at the time, I was embarrassed about a lack of money and didn't want to tell her why I couldn't get new pants. After maybe a month, my teacher moved from verbal warnings to detentions. Still not wanting to say anything and not wanting to stress out my mom, I told my mom I joined an after-school program and went to the detentions. For detention, my school gave you a packet with a list of words and a dictionary. You had to look up all the words and write down the definition word for word. Words like "respect", "discipline", "distraction", "consequence", sheet like that. After the definition section you had to answer a bunch of questions like, why were you placed in detention? What are the consequences of your actions? In the future, what can you do differently? If you didn't finish your packet by the end of the hour, they'd keep it, and you'd have to complete it by the end of your next detention. After 1 week of this, and completing the packet 5 or 6 times, I finally confessed to my teacher that we had no money. With 3 girls in the same grade, and 1 a few years below, my single mother currently enrolled in college, and working 2 jobs, couldn't afford to buy me new pants. I was also faking tired of writing out that packet. My teacher didn't care one bit. Told me she couldn't make exceptions and had to enforce the rules for everybody and that if I didn't find a way to get new pants, she'd keep giving me detentions. I finally told my mom and she said she'd talk to the principal about it. I'm not sure how that conversation went, but basically nothing changed. I was still in detention every day. It got to the point I'd walk into the room and my teacher would be holding out the detention slip for me. I never really liked to complain, so I kept going to detention, but I hated writing out that packet, because in my eyes I had done nothing wrong. My teacher was just picking on me. So I started being honest on the question portion. Why are you in detention? My teacher keeps giving me them because my pants aren't in dress code, even though she knows my mom can afford to buy new pants. What are the consequences of your actions? My class gets distracted because my teacher likes to yell at me for something out of my control. In the future, what can you do differently? Come to school without pants, so there's something she can actually yell at me about. A few weeks of this got me called into the principal's office and a call home to my mother. When my mom showed up, my mom took one look at my principal and said "What do you want me to do? Pull new pants out of my ass?" After that my principal said I didn't have to serve my detentions. I guess my teacher was retiring that year and their replacement for her hadn't moved to the state yet. I was told they would speak to her about the yelling, but that if she handed me a detention slip to quietly take it and just go home at the end of the day. The next day I pranced into her class, snatched the slip from her, and tore it up right in front of her face. Tore up the second slip. She wrote 2. Edit. Thank you for the silver. Warning: this was before everyone had cell phones, and this is from when I was a kid. When I went to the dentist the first time, I was in 4th grade. I had gotten my ass kicked a week before. That may have been some inspiration for the stupidity soon to happen. Anyways, in order to remove the tooth, I got a shot of a numbing agent and I could not feel my face, then took a nap while my tooth was pulled out. When I woke, my mom got me. We got in the car and we headed to the store. I still could not feel my face, so I gave my cheek a smack and still nothing. I proceed to close my hands and punch my face each harder and harder until I'm all but taking a running start. My mom tells me to quit because it's gonna look like she best me. I'm in amusement heaven, knocking the living shit out of myself. The following Monday I head to school and it is about 3rd period. I raise my hand to ask a question and mumble. My face hurts, is yellow and purple, and I can barely open my mouth. My teacher asks me why my face looks the way it does. I obviously got in trouble often. I mumble. She shakes her head. Off to the office I go. So the principal asks why my face looks like an old banana peel, and I mumble through my answer. I probably thought it was pretty awesome. They get on the phone and call my mom at work. When she arrives, there are several cops. The story was so stupid that they figured my mom beat the shit out of me in the office, which really was a desk in a room the size of a janitor's closet. I'm sitting on a chair next to my mom and we have 2 cops on each side, arms crossed, ready to rain down some rural justice. So the principal asks my mom, and she repeats that I went to the dentist then kicked my own ass. So the principal looked at my mom and asked if I was. I still think he was going to say challenged, but she said yes. Has a faking idiot. Sometimes I did, however, get a week off from school and some damage to some other cheeks when I got home. Okay, so this happened to my mom, but it's pretty funny. My brother was never a super popular student with teachers. We were in elementary school in the mid to late 90s in a small religious town. My brother was always pretty sensitive, crying when animals got hurt in movies and stuff, because he's a nice person who feels emotions, and he had always been a bit emotionally immature through no fault of his own. He's smart but disorganized. I was a high achiever, emotionally closed off due to anxiety, and therefore a good quiet kid, and pretty obedient, so teachers loved me, and then got mad when my brother was different than me, and didn't conform to what they believed men and boys should be like. It caused a lot of problems, and teachers always assumed the worst about my brother, even though he was just different than me and had some disabilities anyway. With that in mind, my mom gets a call one day from my brother's 1st grade teacher. She informs my mother that my brother has gotten in trouble for saying something very offensive. My mom thinks great, he's heard a cuss word, and thinks it's okay to say. Well, we'll discuss it later. She asks the teacher what my brother said. The teacher will not say. Now my mom is kind of annoyed. My mom also has a teaching degree, but taught in some big city schools. She's heard it all. She just wants to know what my brother said. Finally, my brother's teacher whispers that while at lunch, my broker held up a pickle spear and asked the girl next to him, if I give you a nickel, will you tickle my pickle? My mom has to use all her energy not to bust out laughing. My brother is 6 years old. He heard that rhyme somewhere and thought it was about a literal pickle. So when he had a pickle at lunch, he remembered the rhyme and repeats it. And this 1st grade teacher is convinced that my brother is actually a sex offender in the making. No, beach, he's a 6-year-old. So, my mom assures the teacher she will come get my brother and discuss it with him. Obviously he was not in any trouble with my parents and they just warned him against repeating funny rhymes. TLDR. Teacher is convinced my brother is a future rapist in the making because he repeats a double entendre rhyme about pickles at 6 years old. This will be buried, but it's my favorite story ever. My younger son was in 1st grade, and I got a call from the school. It seems that my son was at the front desk with his backpack, ready for me to come pick him up, and says that I will be there soon. I said no. I told him that if he felt ill to go to the nurse after he had his picture taken. You see, he had been out sick the day before because I follow the 24-hour fever-free rule, and he had a slight fever Sunday night. However, I knew that kid was no longer sick. He just was done with school for the day. They sent him to the nurse. I get another call 5 minutes later. No fever and he's sitting on the office couch and seems pretty chatty, but still insists that I'm coming to get him. Do I want to talk to him? I told them that I did not want to talk to him. He's a very cute charmer and I'm not getting sucked into this. End of the day, I wondered if I would be met with ire or tears that I did not pick him up. He acted like none of it ever happened. When I asked his teacher about it later on, she was aghast because he swooped up his backpack and walked out of the classroom while her back was turned for less than a minute point. And that is a story of how my 6-year-old tried to check himself out of school. 16 is going to be a roller coaster. Not me, but my girlfriend. Her son is 6, and while he is cute as can be, he's also a crafty little sheet. They get hand stamps when they have been well behaved, and my girlfriend uses these stamps to reward that behavior. Come home with a stamp and get dessert, or some video game time, etc. First he started saying that he got the stamp, but they washed off from hand washing. Now I have taken him into the men's room and his version of hand washing is a sudden and brief dash of his hands under the water, with no scrubbing, and often no soap. I make him stand there and properly wash, and even then he won't hardly rinse and has soap all over his palms. No way he is properly washing on his own at school, and well enough to be washing all traces of the stamps away. So after some investigation and talks with the teacher, they would send home a calendar each day to indicate if he got a stamp. He would conveniently forget the calendar at school, but plead his heart out that he was stamped and a good boy. Not buying it. Next he would show up with just the barest glimmer of a stamp. It was there, but again very faded and washed out, so we believed his excuse that it faded due to hand washing from art class or what have you. Nope, he has a well-behaved stable of friends, and when one gets a fresh stamp he sits next to them and they hold the tops of their hands together to transfer some of the wet ink, so it appears that he got a stamp. Got to hand it to him. Creative and ingenious, but ultimately a big ol' fat lie. Lots of privileges revoked until he gets on the straight and narrow to earn them back. But sweet Jesus, all that effort in lieu of not behaving and following directions. Mildly off topic. I got called one time to collect my son from the police. A little backstory. My son and his group of friends had their cars vandalized for months. Sometimes it was a brick in front of tire. Sometimes tuna smeared on the window, glitter in the air vents, and a various list of other things. Eventually they found out who had been doing it and spent one night plotting their revenge. It involved all of them piling into a car, buying as many eggs as possible, and driving around egging the guilty parties' cars. Being only 16 years old, they were inexperienced in their life of crime and drove by much too slowly. A neighbor had spotted them, and slow speed chase began. That fellow then called the cops and kept updating them where the group of boys were located. Once my son and his friends were apprehended and parents were all brought in, we one by one got to talk to the officer on duty. He was nice, said it's not a huge deal, but don't let it happen again. But we would be hearing from the juvenile court. While we were all down collecting the kids, every single one of their cars was vandalized one last time. Just to add icing to the cake, we got the letter from the juvenile court stating his punishment. On the same day we got a letter from the school letting us know our son was being admitted into the National Honor Society. We still laugh about that one. Not me, but my brother mum was waiting outside the primary school at home time when one of the teachers came out and asked her to come inside. Turns out that the last lesson of the day had been music, and my brother's class sat on the floor near the piano to sing songs. I'm guessing my brother and his friend found this dull, so for whatever reason, my brother slipped his arms out of his jumper, and his friend proceeded to tie him to the old-fashioned radiator they were sat next to. The teacher was at the piano, and had his back to the class. My brother's jumper happened to be a home-knitted one, and the sleeves stretched quite a bit, so his friend wove them around the pipes tying various knots, and in such a way that when the class was dismissed and all the other kids stood up and left, my brother was tied tightly to the radiator and couldn't move. It was done in such a way that the jumper was pulled so tightly across his torso and arms that it couldn't even be pulled over my brother's head. Mum was called in because it was taking so long to try and untie him that they didn't want her to worry when he was late leaving school. The jumper was of course ruined, being stretched so much, so she just told them to cut it. My parents weren't well off at the time, so she was angry with my brother for ruining his jumper, but eventually found it hilarious